Imagine traveling across the country for what you think is a fresh start, only to face scorn from the very man you hoped would welcome you home. This is the gripping story of Ruby Red and Cashin Ridge and Dry Creek, where love defies all odds and prejudice. The wind sliced through the dusty settlement of Dry Creek like a honed-edged church bells chimed noon as a wagon groaned to a halt before the general store, snagging the attention of every idle soul in the plaza. Men lounged off verandas, women quieted their offspring. And old Judge Hamlin peered from beneath his wide-brimmed hat. From the conveyance descended a female figure in a worn blue travel garment, her boots grimy from the journey, her gloved hand clutching a carpet bag. She stood tall despite the ache in her breast, her gaze sweeping the assembly for a visage she committed to memory from a daguerreotype tucked deeply within her satchel. Amos Cartwright stood at the edge of the timber walk, arms crossed, jaw tightly set. He was younger than she'd anticipated, perhaps 35, with a stockman's build, and eyes hard as river stone. Amos Cartwright, she inquired, her voice steady though her gut churned. I am your intended, come to wed. The onlookers leaned in like stalks swaying in a sudden gust. Amos appraised her, his mouth line that so. She reached into her satchel and produced a folded missive yellowed at its creases. You penned this, said you were a man of means, yet weary of solitude, said you sought a virtuous woman to establish a home with. I responded truthfully. She continued, I informed you I possessed no kin and no fortune but a willing heart. You omitted something, he stated, his voice low but sharp enough to sever hide. You omitted that you twirled in a saloon. Gasps rippled through the square like distant thunder, her knuckles whitened around the letter. I told you I worked at McCoy's Tavern in St. Louis, she asserted. I served beverages and rendered ballads. I never. Spread your legs, Amos barked. Is that what you mean to convey? You believe that renders you respectable? A woman in the crowd murmured mercy. And another made the sign of the cross. A blush ascended her neck, the heat of disgrace burning through her stays. I never deceived you. I told you I did what was necessary. I never claimed to be a preacher's daughter, but I am not what you're accusing me of. You're not what I envisioned, Amos declared. I thought you'd be wholesome, pure, a woman suitable to raise progeny and attend worship beside me, not some whiskey-soaked female with painted lips and a past. Her hands trembled as she extended the letter. You asked for someone authentic, Amos. You said you disregarded what came before, only what came next. I've reconsidered, he said flatly. I'm not uniting with any saloon girl. She blinked against the sting in her eyes. Around her the town's inhabitants murmured. A child asked too loudly, Mama, what's a saloon girl? And was promptly hushed. She drew in a breath that ached down to her ribs. I journeyed all this way for you. I expended every remaining coin to reach here. I abandoned a grave and a specter and every scrap of comfort I knew. You should have remained there, he countered. There's no place for your kind here. A brittle silence followed his pronouncement, broken only by the creak of the wagon shifting in the dry wind. She looked at him, truly looked at him, not the man from the image, not the one who wrote in tender script about mornings on the veranda and a wife to share laughter with, but this man now rigid, small-hearted, and fearful. She did not weep, she would not. Instead, she unfurled the letter and read aloud, her voice clear as a bell chime. If you're willing to take a chance on a stranger, I swear I will meet you with kindness and honor. That is what you wrote, kindness and honor. He averted his gaze. She nodded once, then turned to the assembled. Me, she declared, the only deception here is the man who peddled falsehoods and called it hope. She dropped the letter at his feet for a moment. No one moved. Then quietly a wiry old man near the post office doffed his hat one by one. Eyes looked down, turned away, not from her, but from Amos. She stepped down from the timber walk, her boots striking the dirt with purpose. The wind lifted her skirts, and the scent of sage. She walked past the livery, past the smithy, past the judgment, and every breath of this small town, and did not glance back. Her past had pursued her, but so would her future. Somewhere, somehow, St. Louis had never been benevolent to orphans, particularly not to young women who learned too early how swiftly men could transmute need into obligation. She had been 15 when her mother passed, and 17 when she first sang behind the bar at McCoy's Tavern. The establishment reeked of tobacco and spilled whiskey, but it compensated in cash and permitted her to keep her bodice fastened so long as she smiled. She did more than smile. She sang Irish folk songs, Southern spirituals, laments of war widows, all melodies her mother once hummed while boiling potatoes over a flickering flame. The inebriated clapped, some wept, some tossed coins. It sustained her and her brother Samuel in a rented room behind a butcher shop. For 3 years Samuel had been ailing since birth. Coughs that bled into winter nights, fevers that wrung perspiration from his skin like rain from fabric. She had pawned her mother's locket, then her own footwear, to afford tinctures and tonics that never proved effective. One morning, after a prolonged shift pouring rye for a brawling poker table, she returned home to discover his bed cold, simply gone. No note, no farewell, just stillness. Grief hollowed her, but it also sobered her. She no longer belonged to this metropolis, not to its alleyways or its men. The reflection that showed a girl with hope scraped thin one rainy afternoon. She scrubbed lipstick stains from shot glasses. She noticed a crumpled page abandoned on the bar. It was from a Missouri farmer's bulletin. At the bottom, in uneven print, was an advertisement seeking good-hearted woman for marriage, honest, kind, willing to build a home. I am a cattleman with land, but no family letters. Welcome, Amos Cartwright, Dry Creek *. She read it twice, then again. It felt foolish, desperate, surreal, but It also felt like something cracked open just enough for air that night by the flicker of a candle. She wrote of her affinity for music, her quiet fortitude, and the difficult choices made by those with no alternative path. She confessed nothing of her brother's demise or the burden she carried, but she spoke the truth about the saloon, and about her yearning to leave it behind. She folded the letter with a prayer. Her mother might have whispered and walked 3 miles in the rain to post it. Weeks elapsed. She imagined he had discarded it, that he had selected some fresh-faced girl with a father's blessing and a dowry chest full of lace. Then one morning an envelope arrived. He addressed her. As Miss McKenna commended her candor, stated her letter stirred something gentle within him. He said he desired a partner, not a fragile doll, someone who comprehended loneliness and still possessed something left to give. She clutched that letter like scripture. In the ensuing days she packed her meager belongings. One spare garment, a comb, her mother's rosary. She pawned her banjo to afford the train fare. When she purchased her ticket at the station, the clerk gave her a look reserved for unaccompanied women. She stood straighter. She was not fleeing, she was responding. Dry Creek was inscribed on the destination tag, affixed to her satchel, a place she had never witnessed for a man she had never met, carrying only the weight of her past and the last fragile hope of something new. She boarded that train with a heart full of prayers and letters, never once imagining that what awaited it would not be deliverance, but disgrace. Cashin Ridge stood near the telegraph office, a tin of tobacco in one hand and a half-wrapped parcel in the other. When the commotion unfolded on the station platform, he had not intended to linger long in town, just long enough to collect seed orders and mail a letter to his sister in Oregon, but something about the woman descending from the wagon held him motionless. He observed the stiff way she carried herself chin high. Despite the murmur, saw the flash of anguish across her face when the man Amos Cartwright, of all people, unleashed his public scorn. Cashin had never held Amos in high regard. He ran his cattle lean and his mouth loose, but watching the woman stand there humiliated yet unbowed stirred something in Cashin that had not stirred in years. She was alone in every sense as the crowd began to disperse, shame clinging to the dirt like spilled milk. Cashin remained rooted. The woman turned, her boots crunching the gravel, her eyes fixed on nowhere. Her suitcase dangled from her hand like a weight she could no longer bear. The wind toyed with the hem of her dress, but she did not flinch. Cashin stepped forward. Miss, she froze. I witnessed what occurred, he said, carefully moderating his tone. Are you bound somewhere? She turned slowly to face him. Her cheeks were pallid, but her eyes lowered. Her eyes were fire held in water. Does it appear so? I reckon not. A silence stretched between them, thick and awkward. My name's Cashin Ridge, he offered, removing his hat. I've got a ranch about 7 miles west. It ain't much for comfort, but it's clean, and the roof don't leak. You're welcome to stay a few nights, just until you figure out where next. Her gaze narrowed. Why? He tilted his head. Because I would wish someone to offer the same if it were my sister standing here as you are. Her grip tightened on her satchel. You heard what he said. You know what I am. Cashin met her eyes. I heard a fool speaking, and I witnessed a woman maintain her dignity while the entire town attempted to strip it from her. She studied him for a long moment. And you anticipate nothing, not a thing, he affirmed. Not thanks, not favors, just figured no one should be left standing in the dirt with no place to go. She hesitated. Pride and exhaustion wrestled across her face. Finally she nodded. Just once. All right. Cashin nodded back. We ride slow. My horse ain't fond of strangers, but he's too old to argue. They walked to the hitching post where a tired chestnut gelding waited, eyes half-lidded against the sun. Cashin assisted her onto the saddle, then led the reins beside her, boots kicking up dry dust as the town receded behind them. They spoke little on the ride. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two individuals who had nothing left to prove and nothing yet to lose. As they crested the last hill, his ranch came into view. Sprawling fields of golden grass, a weathered barn, and a modest farmhouse with smoke curling from the chimney. The woman looked at it and said softly, "It's beautiful." Cashin glanced up at her. "It's quiet. That's what I needed." He did not finish. She did not inquire. When they reached the porch, he helped her dismount. "There's a guest room stove still warm from breakfast. I'll let you get settled." She paused before stepping through the door. "Mr. Ridge," she said, her voice quiet, "I don't know if I can trust you." He nodded. "I'd be concerned if you did. Trust don't come fast, but you'll find I keep my word." She disappeared inside, leaving him on the porch, hands in his pockets, heart a little heavier than before. Neither of them knew it yet, but they had just stepped into the same storm. Two hearts, battered, buried, but not broken, drawn by something deeper than pity, quieter than hope. Fate had not saved her, but it had placed her in the path of a man who might. The house was warmer than it appeared from the exterior, but it was not a warmth she could truly feel. She slept beneath a patched quilt in a room that smelled faintly of cedar and aged tobacco, her satchel tucked beneath the bed like it might attempt to flee by day. She moved through the dwelling like a wraith, quiet, alert, careful not to touch too much or linger too long. Cashin rose early and labored late, speaking little and less essential. But in the stillness, he attended to small matters. The morning after her arrival, a second cup sat beside the coffee pot. That afternoon he climbed onto the roof and hammered down a loose shingle just above her window. At dusk, she discovered an extra log stacked by the hearth. He never articulated it was for her. He never had to. Still, the distance between them weighed heavily. She endeavored to make herself useful. She mended a torn sleeve in his work shirt, swept the kitchen floor, even chopped a bundle of kindling, until her fingers blistered when she offered to assist with the livestock. Cashin's brows furrowed. "You're a guest," he stated, setting a pail beside the porch. "Not hired help." "I am not helpless," she retorted. "Never said you were, just don't owe me anything." "I owe you my dignity," she said, sharper than she intended, "and my shelter. That is not a debt I take lightly." He looked at her, then long and slow. "You think I provided you a roof so I could hold it over your head. I think kindness always has a cost." He set down the pail. "Then you haven't seen real kindness yet." The words settled between them like dust on a window pane. Clear, cold, unmoving. By the end of the week, the whispers reached them. It commenced at the feed store. A shopkeeper's wife clucked her tongue when Cashin walked past with a sack of oats. Didn't know the rancher was entertaining saloon girls now. She remarked loud enough for everyone to hear. At church, someone had left a folded note on the back pew. "Even wolves dressed like sheep." When they're after something sweet, Cashin said nothing. He was not a man of disputes. But when they passed through town together one market morning, and a boy spat near her feet, it was the final thread. Cashin turned, seized the boy by the collar, and lifted him clean off the ground. "You got something to say to a lady?" He growled. "You say it to her face, or you keep your damn mouth shut." The boy's mother shrieked. The sheriff, sitting 2 steps away on a porch swing, rose slowly. "Let the boy go, Cashin." Cashin's jaw twitched, but he complied. Then he turned to the crowd that had begun to gather. "This woman," he announced, pointing to her without looking at her, "came here with more courage than most of you have ever had to muster. You do not know her story, you do not know her soul, but you sure know how to run your mouths." Silence. Then Cashin tipped his hat, took her gently by the elbow, and led her back to the wagon. They rode home in silence, dust trailing behind them like a wake. That night she lit the fire herself. He sat in his usual chair, boots off, reading the same newspaper from 3 days ago. "You did not have to defend me," she stated, not looking up. He folded the paper slowly. "Did not deserve to be spat on." She stared into the flames. "Thank you." Cashin said nothing, but something between them had shifted. Not erased, not fixed, just seen. The first snow fell early that year, soft as breath and quiet as prayer. It blanketed the prairie in silence, blurring the edges of fences and fields, until everything looked gentler than it was inside the ridge home. The fire crackled steadily. She wrapped herself in a shawl Cashin had left on the banister and stared out the window at the drift forming on the fence rail. She had seen snow before it, dirty city snow that turned to slush in alleys, but not like this, not white as linen, not honest. Cashin entered from the cold with snow melting in his beard, fires holding. He said, hanging his coat by the door. "Tomorrow I'll check the ridge fence. Coyotes will start prowling soon." She nodded, then glanced toward the hearth. "Would you sit a while?" He hesitated, then slowly he did. They sat across from each other, the fire between them. No words passed for a long time. Then Cashin said, his voice low, "Was married once." She looked up. She was small, strong as an ox, laughed with her whole face. He rubbed his hands together. "We were married 6 years, tried for children. She carried 2, but neither stayed." He did not look at her, only the flames. "The second one. We almost made it. She got sick, fever came fast. I was in town picking up lumber, came back to find her in the bed, soaked through, baby gone, her gone by morning." Her breath caught. "I am sorry." He nodded. "Once me too." She looked down at her lap, then at the fire, then back at him. "I had a brother, Samuel. We were all we had after Mama died. He was sick, always coughing, always cold. I worked nights so he could keep the room warm, feed him, but it was not enough." She swallowed. "One night I came back and he was gone, just gone, like the Lord had taken him without asking." Cashin finally looked at her, and no one helped. No one had reason to, she said. He was just one more poor child in a city full of them. They sat in the quiet that follows grief, not just shared, but understood. In the days that followed, something began to ease between them. She would hum while peeling potatoes, and Cashin would pause on his way out the door, listening. When she found a patch of winter berries near the edge of the woods, she called to him to help gather them. Their hands brushed in the snow, and neither pulled away. One night she brought out a small banjo she had tucked deep in her satchel. "You play?" he inquired. A little. Under the soft light of an oil lamp, she plucked the strings. The melody was slow, mournful, something between a lullaby and a lament. Cashin sat at the table, arms folded, watching her like a man who had forgotten what music felt like. She looked up halfway through the tune and caught his gaze. He did not smile, but his eyes softened. The next evening he left a jar of honey on the table with no explanation. The snow kept falling. Days blended into nights. Work was harder in the cold, but the warmth inside the house no longer came only from the fire. They shared meals and silences, laughter in small doses, glances that lingered too long still. Neither articulated it, still neither dared. Then one night the wind howled louder than usual, and the fire snapped high. She stood by the hearth tending the flames. Cashin came up behind her, his presence a heat of its own. "You should rest," he said. "I cannot sleep," she replied. "Why not?" She turned, eyes shadowed with questions she was not ready to voice. "I do not know who I am here," she whispered, "or what I am to you." Cashin's voice was hoarse. "You are not just passing through, if that is what you mean." She searched his face. "Then what am I?" His hand rose, almost without his own permission, to touch her cheek. "You are the first quiet I have felt in years." She did not move. He leaned closer, breath met breath, and then he kissed her. It was not urgent, it was not hungry, it was two souls pressing close in the only way they still knew how. When he pulled back, her eyes shimmered. "If I were someone else," she said, her voice thin, "someone with no past, no stories to hide, would you still?" He cupped her jaw gently. "If you were someone else," he said, "you would not be you." The fire crackled beside them. Outside, snow kept falling. Inside, something warmer began to grow. Spring had not yet arrived, but the snow had begun to loosen its grip. Mud pooled where drifts once lay, and the sky turned a softer shade of gray. Life at the ranch found a quiet rhythm. Morning chores, evening meals, touches that lingered and eyes that spoke what mouth still feared. She had begun to hope she dared to imagine a future here, one built not from survival, but from choice, from warmth, from love. Then the past found her. It was a Thursday, quiet and windless, when the man rode into Dry Creek. Slim-billed, sharp-mouthed, the smell of whiskey clinging to his coat, he sauntered into the general store and ordered rye like he owned the place. It was not long before his voice rose loud enough to be heard across the boardwalk. "You all got a saloon girl up at the Ridge place now." He laughed, his voice slick with mockery. "Hell, I'd know Ruby Red anywhere girl could pour a drink, sing like a saint, and flirt like the devil himself." The name hit the town like a slap. Ruby Red, her old name, the one barkeeps used. Gamblers whispered and lonely men had muttered into their glasses. By sundown the whispers were back, only now they were louder. Cashin noticed it at the blacksmith's shoulders, turned greetings, muttered, or not offered at all. The grocer's boy, who used to wave from the fence, now averted his eyes. Even the preacher, a man Cashin had lent lumber to during last winter's freeze, looked away without nodding when Cashin returned home, face tight and jaw locked. She knew, she saw it in the set of his shoulders. "What did they say?" she asked. He hesitated. "They're fools." "That is not what I asked." He met her eyes. "They said your name, the one you left behind." Silence. "Is it true?" he added softly. She nodded. "Yes." His face did not change. "Does not matter." "It matters to them," she said, "and it will matter to you." "No, it will not." She reached for his hand, but he did not take it, not out of anger, but distance, the kind that grows when words fail and wounds return. That night she could not sleep. She sat at the small table beneath the oil lamp, a piece of paper trembling in her hand. The words came slowly. "And then all at once I came to you because of a letter. But I leave because of love. You gave me a place I never dreamed I could have, but I will not be the cause of you losing yours. You once told me I was the first quiet you'd felt in years. I will not let my noise drown that." When morning came, Cashin woke to silence. Her boots were gone from beside the door. The shawl she favored no longer hung by the stove, and on the table, folded neatly beneath a smooth stone, lay the letter. He read it once, then again. The chair scraped the floor as he stood, his breath caught not in anger, but in something deeper, something like fear. Outside, the wind picked up. The field stretched out wide and empty, the house behind him too still, too clean. She was gone. And he had never even said the words. Cashin stood in the doorway, the letter still clutched in his hand, the wind howling around him like a warning from God. He read it a third time. "I leave love." No, that was not how this would conclude. He moved with purpose, grabbing his coat, boots, and saddle in one motion. Within minutes he had mounted Dusty, his oldest gelding, and spurred him toward town. Snow began to fall again, sharp, fast, blinding. The clerk at the livery had seen her board a northbound wagon just before dawn, said she was headed to the station. He mumbled, eyes wide at the storm rolling, and not wise to travel in weather like this. Cashin did not answer. He rode harder than he had in years, the wind slapping his face. Raw snow stung his eyes. The tracks were faint, half swallowed by the rising drifts. But still, they're still real. He followed them like a bloodhound follows, scent driven, unrelenting. The sky turned iron gray, trees swayed like old men in pain. But he pressed on. By the time he reached the station, the building looked like a carcass. Wood, warped windows, frost laced the roof, sagging beneath the weight of snow. He dismounted, heart thudding. "Miss." He shouted into the storm. No answer. He pushed open the warped door and stepped inside. There she was, curled on a bench, arms wrapped tight around her satchel, eyes red from wind or tears. He could not tell. Her head snapped up at the sound of his boots. "Cashin," she said, her voice trembling. He crossed the space between them in 3 long strides. "You left," he stated. "You didn't give me the chance to fight for you." She looked down. "I didn't want you to have to." He dropped to one knee, snow melting and his hair dripping from his coat. "If you're the past," he said, "then I want to live in it. I want to wake up every morning knowing exactly who you are, because I have never met anyone braver or stronger or more worth the loving." Her lips parted, words caught behind disbelief. "I don't care what they say," he whispered. "I care what you feel, and what I feel is that I love you." A tear rolled down her cheek. "I love you," he said again. "Not in spite of who you were, but because of who you are." He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a simple silver band, his mother's, polished and worn from time. "I don't have much to offer, but this land, this heart, and whatever years the Lord still got for me. Will you take them?" She stared at him, then slowly she slid from the bench to kneel beside him. "You came for me," she whispered, "always would have." She took his hand in the ring and nodded yes. And there in the ruin of an empty train station, while snow swirled and hearts mended, a vow was mad, not to forget the past, but to carry it together into something new. The wedding took place 2 days after the storm broke. Beneath a wide open sky brushed with silver clouds, there were no flowers, no choir, no guests. Beyond the wind and the waiting land, they stood in the meadow behind the house, where the first shoots of spring pushed through thawing earth. Cashin wore his cleanest shirt and an old brown vest. She wore the same dress she had arrived in, stitched neat at the seams and softened by time. In her hair a single sprig of wild sage. The preacher came from 2 towns over, said little, prayed simply, and when he asked the question that mattered, Cashin looked at her as though no one else had ever existed. "I do," he said, steady and clear. She took his hands, rough and honest. "I do," she echoed, her voice trembling. Only once they sealed it, with a kiss beneath the open sky. A promise made not to impress the world, but to defy it. No one in Dry Creek was invited, and yet by week's end everyone knew. The town had not forgotten who she was. The whispers still danced through pews and porches. Ruby Red, they called her behind closed doors, but they also said something else now, something. Even they could not deny that. Cashin Ridge, the loner rancher who had buried more grief than most men ever face, had finally found peace that he laughed now quietly. But often that the woman at his side walked with grace and worked like someone building not just a life, but a home that loved kind folks only spoke of in Storish had come to stay on the edge of the prairie. She took his name not as a prize, but as a truth ridge she still sang sometimes out on the porch at dusk when the chores were done and the sun dipped low. Her voice had changed, no longer polished for tips, no longer forced. It was hers again, unafraid. Cashin would listen from the fence line, or from the barn door, a cup of coffee cooling in his hand. They had no riches, no children came, but they had mornings, shared breakfasts, winter fires, letters kept in drawers and hands that reached in sleep. And most of all, they had each other fiercely and without apology. In the years that followed, folks kept talking. But over time, even the whispers grew softer. Eventually, the tale of the woman who came to Dry Creek for a letter and stayed for love became something else entirely. It became legend, the kind passed down from porch to pew, from grandmother to granddaughter, the kind that made people believe that maybe, just maybe, love could rise even from dust. And in the closing lines of that story, if one listened closely, they would hear the truth. In a place where folks believed love was fleeting, they lived like it was forever. What did you think of Ruby's journey? Please share in the comments below and like this video for more inspiring stories.